What's up, Story Geeks? On today's show, we're diving back into the MCU to dig deeper into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It is one of the top five. Is it one of the top five? I almost said it was one of the top 5 films of all time. But is it? That's the question. Is it one of the top 5 MCU films of all time? And then where does it fit in this MCU trilogies sort of context? Is it one of the top trilogies, or is it somewhere down the list? We'll talk about that and much, much more. Welcome to the Story Geek Show, officially part of the Orange Grove 55 network. Let's dig deeper into the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and the MCU. I have an illustrious panel of folks joining me to talk about this today. And we have OG behind the scenes, like working things, which is amazing because it just starts happening. And I didn't even know we don't even see him, but everything starts working, which is really
Producer
cool.
OG, my favorite.
Producer OG. I love it. I'm going to start by going clockwise around here with Mr. Disney Family Man 23, the host of Citrus Corner. Mr. George, tell the folks where they can find you.
Absolutely. And first off, I have to say thanks for having me on. It's great to be back. It's been a while, but I'm happy to be here and talking some Guardians with everybody. So yes, if you want to find me on my YouTube channel, Disney Family Man 23. If you want to interact with me on Twitter, you can do so at Disney George. You could also check out the podcast I am part of called A Walk with Walt. And of course, you can find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
Yes. Welcome to the show, George. George and I, when we started this show, George and I have not been on this show very often. So it's a pleasure to have you, George. Thanks for joining us. And then one of the guests that you've seen on the Story Geeks before, if you've been an old school fan of the Story Geeks, we were just talking before the show. We met in 2016, I think, at a conference. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I think it was Long Beach Comic-Con.
Long Beach Comic-Con.
We were all so young. There was less gray in our beards. And then I've been on. I talked about the Justice League. What was that 5-hour version of the Justice League? I came on to talk about that.
That's right. Yeah, we had a whole breakdown of Justice League versus Zack Snyder's Justice League. It was quite a show.
It was a good time, and the show was better than either of those movies.
I see. This is where we differ because we fought for about 2 hours because I like Zack Snyder's Justice League and Mike does not like it. So it was a kind of a back and forth.
Yes,
it was a fun show because it was always going to be a fun show when Mike's on. And Mike, tell the folks about where they can find you and what shows you're a part of.
Yeah, we're over on social medias at YourPopFilter, the wider umbrella, the Superhero Show, which I realized I could put in my name, where we cover every live-action TV show based on comic books every week. And then we also have Movie of the Year, where every season is a different year, and we build a giant bracket and make the movies fight. We are wrapping up 2002.
That's awesome. I always want to call it the Superhero Show instead of the
that would work.
Show. I always get it wrong.
As long as something's repeated, we're fine.
Yeah, exactly. As long as we got some duplication. And then, of course, the host of Freshly Squeezed, Mr. VashSky. Dre, how are you, sir?
Hello there. Well, I'm doing all right. It's been busier than the Dickens over here at the Dre estate or whatever you want to say. I got so many titles and everything like that. I don't even know what we call the homestead here. Interesting. I'll have to think about that. But thank you so much for having me on, Dre. Seriously, it's been far too long since I've been able to come on the Story Geeks show and talk some shop about the stories that most impact our lives, right? So thank you so much for having me on and talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. That is some fun stuff right there. If anybody would like to see me, you can go do so right down there at VashSky. Just go ahead and type it in and it should pop up for, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy might say, for all the
robust
discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, in Orange Grove 55, where my show exists there as well. Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh, right from the Grove. Let's see, which one? There you go.
Nice. We're gonna need an MCU drop at some point in time, huh?
I know. Yeah.
We've done mostly Star Wars so far.
Mm.
So I want to give a shout out to Theme Park Casual, who will not be joining us, but he has not seen the movie yet. And this is going to be a spoiler filled discussion. So we're going to go all over the place. If you haven't seen the movie, just know you will be spoiled. Know that going in. And then Ali Aloha, who also submitted a topic for us. So we'll get into that in a little bit. First of all, thank you all for joining us today. It will be a spoiler filled show. And I want to start out with the kind of a softball question. We'll go around in the clockwise direction here. So I'll start with you here, George. On a scale of 1 to 10, we'll get into why we gave the ratings that we're going to give. So let's just start with just saying what is the scale of 1 to 10 rating, and then we'll get into why later. What do you think, George?
Well, I actually that was the first question I thought of for myself walking out into the theater. And for me, I would have to give it a solid 9.
9. Perfect.
9.
That's awesome. Mike, what do you think? What is this on a scale of 1 to 10?
I've been thinking about this all day, and I have to say, if 10 is Winter Soldier and 1 is The Dark World, this is, I'd say 6.7, 6 or 7, so 6.7.
6.7. Oh man,
Yes.
that might be. I haven't heard Dre's rating yet. I knew George liked it a lot, so we'll see. We'll see if Mike and I are going to be arguing the whole show again too, which is always makes for good radio, makes for good show. Dre, what do you think? What's the scale of 1 to 10 here?
I've been thinking about this one as well because I think it's above average. But I mean, there's some top tier MCU fare at the very top echelon, right there. And does it meet it? Not quite. So solid 8, right there.
Oh, okay, solid 8. Solid 8. That's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's not bad. Now the top row, George and I are much more on the same page because I have it at a 9.5. I freaking loved this film. So this is the next question though. The critics actually gave this a fairly low 82%. And I think I shared a link with OG earlier. If we want to bring up the Rotten Tomatoes scores for what we see in the MCU. And I was kind of surprised that it got an 82%. Now, I'm not as surprised hearing Mike's opinion of it, right? Because that's not like that probably gives it on the scale of Rotten Tomatoes, it probably gives it like a 75, right? Like based on how Rotten Tomatoes does their work. But I've been pretty surprised that because mostly everything I've heard is really, really positive. I think Mike, you rated it the lowest of anybody that I've heard yet.
Really? Can I say I loved it? I really liked it. I just am a harsh grader.
Oh, that's good too. Well, it's good to be a harsh grader. But it's interesting because like I would have said that in my opinion, this is better than Winter Soldier. Because like a lot of people say that Winter Soldier is their favorite MCU film. And for me, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 is my favorite MCU film.
See, that's mine.
Yeah, exactly.
That's mine.
Exactly. So what's your favorite MCU film, Dre?
Yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy is. I mean, it's like between like 4. So, Winter Soldier is amazing. I really love that. That was kind of an inflection point for the entire MCU, I think, because it was it was so transformative and it was something really different. This kind of suspense thriller, really really good. But man, Infinity War is like super high up on that list, right? It's like the culmination of so many different films coming before it. It's very very dark and so forth. That was pretty awesome. Endgame is definitely got to be up there, but not quite, So it's like it's between and the original Guardians. I mean, I had so much fun watching that film for the first time.
Come on, Dre. Just be honest with all of us. It's Captain Marvel.
Yeah, Captain. well, actually, let's see here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's one of them. That's something. But no, I mean, like there's some amazing films in this series, and so when one doesn't quite reach it up at the top there, it can be a little bit frustrating, especially with this one because, well, there's a lot riding on this, as we'll get into, I'm sure, in this conversation.
Yeah, and that's actually a pretty good segue. I'll start with you on this one, Mike. A lot of people have been asking, this is all over Twitter right now, and this was brought up by Sam Chat on Twitter as well. Before the show, he wanted us to talk about this. Now that the MCU has multiple trilogies, where does the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy rank in relationship to the other trilogies? So those are, just for the sake of going through them, Captain America has a trilogy, Thor has a trilogy, technically 4 films, but you can put them in any order and call it a trilogy. Iron Man has a trilogy, Ant-Man has a trilogy, and Spider-Man has a trilogy. And if you really want to, you can throw in any Avengers. There's 4 Avengers films. You can throw those into a trilogy as well. So the question is, which ones of these, Mike, are the top tier trilogies in the MCU?
The top, for me, I think it's going to become more and more apparent that I'm a Cap guy. I think pound for pound, it's the least weak of all the trilogies. I think there's the strongest moments across the board, the strongest full movies across the board. So I think Cap's trilogy is the highest for me.
It has to be.
And then there's not another trilogy. I love all of the movies. It might be Cap, Avengers, Ant-Man. I love the Ant-Man movies, even though the last one I was on. Who else
Iron
is
Man,
there?
Thor.
Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, I think, has one good movie. And then, so I'd put this is like right under Cap. Even though I really, really dislike Volume 2, I think it's one of the weaker movies in the MCU. I'll count Holiday Special and say, overall, the story of the Guardians is one of my favorites. And because it's James Gunn he knows how to thread the needle between what he wants to do and what a giant corporation wants from him.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I'm going to be very similar to that with a couple nuances. But what about you, Dre?
Yeah, pretty similar, pretty close. I mean, the Avengers trilogy is actually pretty good, but Caps, I think Mike makes a good point here. Pound for pound, the some of the highest moments are attached to the Captain America trilogy, and yeah, I mean, there's not like a Captain America movie that I like. Do I watch it? Do I not watch it? No, it's good, and they're all good for different reasons, right? So that's definitely, those two definitely got to be at the top end. But the other trilogies, not so great. The Ant-Man trilogy, it's all right, I suppose. The Spider-Man trilogy, I mean No Way Home is good, but I just have problems with the first two. But those are personal biases of mine. I mean, it's not. These are not objective opinions, right? And then like Thor, not good. Iron Man, man, that first movie is a killer. I mean, it's awesome. It's really great. But the next two, man, those are some of the weakest of the entire MCU. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So we're going to see if George and I are closer to the same page or not. So George, what do you think? What are the best trilogies? How do you rank these?
Okay, so for me, I kind of have it similar to Mike and Dre, but a little bit swapped a little bit. Me, I prefer the Avengers storyline completely as a whole, but then I would say Captain America, because I feel like you would still need the Captain America trilogy to fully understand the Avengers storyline, because a lot of it has to do with Cap, especially when it gets into Civil War and especially at the very end of Endgame. So all those kind of intertwine more so with Cap's story moving in with the Avengers, and even a little bit with Iron Man. But I feel like, especially with the end, with Captain America, he kind of had like that love letter goodbye sort of thing where it ties in well. As far as with then I would say the Guardians, even though yes, I'm not a huge fan of Volume 2. It was okay, but I still think as a whole the Guardians still withhold a very strong trilogy. Then Spider-Man, but would keep Spider-Man up at the top for me was No Way Home. If it was just the first two, that would be probably right next to Thor in my case. But Thor is like below than even if I could put on a 1. I'm sorry. He as a character is okay, like when it's mixed in with the Avengers and what have you. As a standalone character with his storyline, especially when it moves into Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, it loses so much translation for me. But the comedy fits in with the Guardians. It just their style. It does not fit well with Thor. Yeah. So I would say Avengers, Captain America, Guardians, Iron Man, Spider-Man. Sorry, I forgot about Iron Man. Iron Man, Spider-Man, and then Thor.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you're probably more in alignment with these guys than maybe I am, but barely, because we all are saying that the top ones are the top ones. Like, and if you look at all the scores, they are the top ones. It's interesting to me too.
I'm sorry, Ant-Man. I'm sorry, Ant-Man before Thor, but after Spider-Man.
Okay, that makes sense. Because one of the things you can look at is like you could look at like what's the character arc if you take it away from the trilogies and you just say here's all the films and all the characters appearing in all the films as opposed to just their trilogies. You know, Thor has one of the best character arcs probably in the MCU, with the exception of Love and Thunder, which is like, in my opinion, a disaster. I know everyone doesn't agree with that, but I can't stand it. And he's got a great character arc. Cap doesn't have so much of an arc as he has like a little bit of a bump. He doesn't change a whole lot, but what he does is cool. Iron Man has a pretty cool character arc because of what happens in some of his films, but again, those films aren't great films, and so it's weird. It's this weird. I think Guardians of the Galaxy is the best trilogy because if you track all of the characters and all of their arcs, it's pretty fantastic. What those characters go through and where they get to. So it's still probably my favorite, but Cap is for sure second, right? What's up to Marty Snyder and Doc Hart? Glad you guys could join us. We're talking about trilogies in the MCU. Which trilogies are the best? I put Guardians of the Galaxy at the top, put Cap second. I mean, Cap's movies, Civil War to me, I prefer Civil War to Winter Soldier, and I actually prefer.
I do too.
Yeah, the first Captain America I also prefer to Winter Soldier, which is weird. It is a really well done movie. It's not a bad movie at all. It's a fantastic movie. It's a little bit just more personal preference. Like, do you want to see a spy movie or do you want to see something else? But those three movies, and I think the first Captain America is an underrated film. Like most people should go back and watch that again because it's awesome. So yeah, I agree with you guys there. I like Spider-Man a little bit more than you guys do. I did not like the Gyllenhaal movie with Spider-Man. It's fine, but it's not my favorite. But I did like Homecoming quite a bit, and I thought that Michael Keaton was awesome in Homecoming. But No Way Home is by far the best of that trilogy. So it's just weird because some of the characters are so beloved because of what they do in other films, not because of what they do in their own trilogy. But the Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, are at their best in the trilogy, which is interesting. And we'll get into how James Gunn shapes that later in our conversation. But I think we're pretty much close to the same page on that one. Go ahead, Dre.
You're on mute, Dre.
Yeah.
Sorry. I keep forgetting that. A lot of it has to do with the creators that are really kind of, that this is kind of these trilogies or characters are entrusted with, right? And so some creators pull that off a little bit better than others. That's just kind of how that happens. So it's an interesting dynamic as the MCU develops. Who really kind of rises up and who kind of falls, even though maybe initially you thought, oh, how's James gonna work with this ragtag kind of crazy? Not even C characters, D characters. Nobody had even heard of the Guardians before. Make a joke on that early on. That's kind of funny, and you go from there, right? Versus like, oh, Jon Favreau, that's gonna be awesome. Can't wait to see what he does again in this realm, and then kind of falls flat there. Taika Waititi and there have been some others that have contributed to this and to varying degrees. So it is a really kind of interesting thing, and that kind of happens here with this trilogy. Now, not as profound as maybe some of the other kind of directorial rotations that have happened with the previous with the aforementioned trilogies. But like, for example, James Gunn here, this was the first Guardians, if I'm not mistaken, where he had sole writing credit. Right. I mean, this was very much his project. Everything was entrusted in him to a degree that hadn't been previously, and that may have contributed to some creative decisions there as well. But then, you've remember the As Guardians of the Galaxy talk? Whatever happened to that? There's some interesting stuff happening with this trilogy as well.
Nice. Sorry, I lost you guys for 1 second. My computer completely froze, and I thought I'm doomed. I'm out, and then it came back. So yeah, you just to pick up on what you were saying, Dre.
Sure.
This is James Gunn is a guy. We're gonna get into James Gunn a little bit later too, because obviously he's at DC now. This is his last Marvel film. He's not, as far as we know, he's not contractually obligated to do any more Marvel. Only going to do DC. This is a guy who was canceled in the middle of his trilogy, and yet he found a way to come back. He found a way to do the things that he needed to do to be able to create this amazing trilogy. And I think you can see some of his experience with being canceled in the films, if I'm being honest. Like, he talks a lot about second chances. He talks a lot about a lot of these characters make giant mistakes that they need to have some kind of rectify themselves from and be forgiving of other people. And that's a perspective you don't get a lot in the MCU. And it is what makes me like the Guardians of the Galaxy slightly better than I like Cap, because Cap is always good. Like, even in Civil War, you can't really blame him for making any of the choices that he makes, right?
Right.
He's just a good dude. And so yeah, Mike's like, maybe we'll blame him for some of his choices. But either way, I think James Gunn has been phenomenal for the MCU, and hopefully he will be in the future. We'll talk about that, about the DCEU in a minute. Marty Snyder said that the Guardians is his favorite. Gunn did not drop the ball on Volume 3. I'm sad to lose him at Diz, but DC really needs him. And also, Gunn's soul writing could have been what it took to get him back to the Guardians. Soul writing.
Now, if I could actually add something to that,
please.
and because we were talking about like our films of like what is top, what is now my favorite Marvel characters are the Guardians. See, I think there's a difference between the storyline. If I compare it to the Avengers and Cap, I prefer Cap's storyline where it ties into the Avengers. But as far as the characters themselves, I feel like that's where the Guardians have the top tier over any Marvel film, because they have a great character arc within the story that I feel like is something completely different. They are not just the typical superhero cape, spandex tights, the underwears that right up the crotch. It's like you get these badass type of misfits, so to speak, that they kind of create their own way of what you would call a quote unquote hero.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah. It's an interesting point, because Cap's story is so contextual, right? So he is who he is. It's kind of like an inversion of like the storytelling trope of a dynamic character. It's not that he's dynamic, much as what's around him is very dynamic, right? Where, he comes from this kind of 1940s era mindset and then gets thrust into the modern world. What would that do to somebody, right? Or how would they impart maybe their values onto the world around them, and how maybe those values might impart where he's going there. So that's kind of an interesting thing, but it's so contextual. Whereas the Guardians, I mean, you could throw them in any situation and they're hilarious. They're awesome. So there is kind of it's what's your flavor? The Guardians are pretty compelling as characters for sure.
And it's so impressive how they all arc. Like, he juggles all these characters so well. All of them have arced and grown and changed. None of them got that solo movie to be like, okay, now we just get to hang out with Gamora, and so that gives you a lot of extra time, right, to have that character growth. So yeah, he spins all those plates so well.
Yeah, in a kind of amazing way, because so there are some people who are great at ensemble movies. I know that there's a lot of people out there that absolutely love Joss Whedon, And I will tell you that if you like Joss Whedon, you love how he does ensembles because he is phenomenal at ensembles. I don't really prefer Joss Whedon. I don't think he's bad. I just not my personal preference. But James Gunn brings in the ensemble and captures all of the other things that I want to be done in the films. Like James, I think if I were to compare Joss Whedon and James Gunn and say that what the differences are, to me, Joss Whedon brings characters in and gives them very minor arcs. And so he's perfect for like the Avengers because it's like everybody needs a minor arc, but they don't need a major arc, right?
Yeah.
To me, James Gunn is the kind of person who comes in and at least gives one or two characters in his films major arcs. And I just love that. I think that that's a phenomenal way of tying us into these characters in such a way. I mean, like you said, George, some of these characters are my favorite in the MCU, and I had never read a comic book starring the Guardians of the Galaxy in my life before this, right? So all of that is really, really cool.
That's great.
Yeah, super creative. So we got a lot of topics from Twitter. Let's start with one that we got from this is a kind of a dual question here. I'll start with you, George. Theme Park Wizard, shout out to Theme Park Wizard, and Aaliyah Aloha, who's in the chat. What's up, Aaliyah? They talked about the High Evolutionary. So the first question is the High Evolutionary a top tier villain? And the second question has been going around Twitter a bunch too, and that is, we have a character in the MCU who is pivotal to the MCU moving forward from a villain standpoint, and that is Kang, and he is played by Jonathan Majors, who is currently facing some charges. We don't know if he'll be convicted of those charges, innocent until proven guilty. We have no clue what's going to happen there. But if Disney felt the need to drop Jonathan Majors, could you replace the actor who plays the High Evolutionary, which, by the way, I cannot even begin to pronounce his name, so I apologize in advance. I'm not even going to try and butcher it. But would the High Evolutionary, would the actor who plays the High Revolutionary be a good replacement for Kang? So is he a top-tier villain, and would this be a good replacement for Kang? George, what do you think?
After the fact I saw the movie, I walked out of the theater, and normally I always get drawn to the villain. I don't know why, because the villain is like you have that protagonist and you have the antagonist, and it's like you need both to kind of have a cohesive story. However, for this film, I don't feel like the villain really was a standout for me to say, wow, he was like a major threat. I mean, he is like a top tier villain like Ronan was in Volume 1. I mean, like he was a badass villain in Volume 1. So for this villain in particular with Volume 3, in comparison, and even to Volume 2, you know, with Kurt Russell playing the villain, even though Volume 2 wasn't my cup of tea, it was still a strong villain as for a character. For Volume 3, it was a little bit lackluster, but I think the villain had to play backseat in this because there was much more of a story arc within the Guardians themselves. I felt like a lot of their inner demons throughout the volume was the villain, of how they connect with each other, rather than it just be the what everyone was thinking was the main villain. So no. So to answer the first part of the question, I don't feel like he was a strong top tier villain, but I don't say that as a bad way. It's just the way that the storyline goes. I don't feel like, you know, there's a lot more villains in the MCU that made a stronger impact in the storyline. The second part of the question, I really do feel that if something were to come of Jonathan Majors playing his character, I feel like the actor in Volume 3 could replace him, because they can the MCU is very dynamic when it comes to changing things, and they could even adapt an extra storyline of thinking that this character was part of Kang, you know. So it's like, so they can kind of tie that in. So it's like, oh well, Jonathan Majors, he was just in another format. This is the real true look of Kang, because the actor who plays in Volume 3 is a very good actor. He's very, you know, he really, the way that he brings in the emotion, I think if he was to adapt his kind of version of Kang. I think it would be very interesting if it turns out where for Marvel to not use Jonathan Majors. So the first part, no. The second part, yes.
Nice. Mike, do you agree? What do you think?
I liked the High Evolutionary. I think in the scheme of one of my biggest complaints of Marvel as a 30 film franchise is like villains are often because they're killed, they don't get the chance to grow and become better. Like for me, Killmonger and Vulture are high level, and that has so much to do with the actors who infuse them with that. And then like Loki's good, but I liked High Evolutionary is a different vibe, right? You're not like, nobody's going to be like High Evolutionary was right unless they're a monster. But this is this like high operatic Cruella de Villian kind of bad guy. Like nobody's going to relate to him, but like you can tell he believes it. And there's so many gross people in this world who would hurt anybody for quote unquote perfection. I think he captured that. And he was Myrn in Peacemaker, and such a different vibe and such a different character. And I really think he has range. He's what I love about Gunn is once you're in his circle, he's like, I love you, I'm going to work with you again. And it's just like the Guardians are a family on screen. Gunn creates that throughout all of his projects, and I think there's a reason people want to work with him again. Like Nathan Fillion's been working with Gunn since his Trauma days, and there's a reason for that. And yes, we just got the Terrence Snyder. I think we don't even need to be like, and here's a little joke about how you look different now. Terrence Howard got replaced, and we just moved on.
That's right.
How am I blanking on the first Hulk? I'm watching a movie with him in right now. American History X got replaced, and we all moved on. Like we don't need to comment. Edward Norton. Thank you, Edward Norton. You know when your brain just shuts down in the middle of a sentence. And we moved on. I think recasting is fine, especially with this like undone before behemoth that Marvel is doing. Just like you're not going to be able to keep everybody forever. Let's keep things going. And yeah, I think replacing Majors with I'm going to try this Chukwudi Iwuji would be fine. And just like let's make him a Kang, keep at it. And that would help tie things together. That's a complaint about this phase, or I guess we're in phase 5 now, right? But as things are, so this would be a retcon tied together and feel very comic booky. Like you didn't even know that he was a Kang the whole time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mike. Can you pronounce his name again?
I believe it's Chukwudi Iwuji.
Gazoon tight.
Chukwudi All right, Dre, what do you think?
Yeah, so the it's interesting. It's fascinating how we're talking about Jonathan Majors being recast for some past conduct when James Gunn, if we were to replace him, where would we be right now? Isn't it about redemption? Isn't it about moving on and making amends and so forth? We'll see. Because the context of these situations are very, very different, and are the sins of each forgivable to the degree that we can produce product and nobody really thinks of those things. It's a fascinating kind of philosophical debate there. But getting back to the between Kang and the High Evolutionary. Unfortunately, I did not see Quantumania, so I do apologize. I can't give really input into his performance or whether or not he's a compelling villain or not. I just haven't seen it. However, I can kind of speak to the High Evolutionary a little bit. I think the backstory there is really compelling. I think it's really intriguing. This guy who's like obsessed with perfection, that he creates whole societies and civilizations and I guess a race of beings, and then just just eliminates them afterwards. That's like, whoa. I mean, that's kind of insane right there. So it's I mean, I'm not saying it's as maybe as compelling or as simplistic or approachable as maybe Thanos, because that kind of makes sense, right? Oh, there's not enough resources to go around, half the people, there you go. This is a little bit more of a nuanced kind of villain and a look at these destructive tendencies that go along with this kind of attempting to attain perfection, all this kind of stuff. So it's it's a little bit more than that. I think that backstory could really kind of lend itself towards a multi-phase villain doing stuff in the backdrop. It absolutely can. As far as the performance, though, I don't know. I thought some more subtlety with the performance, I think, could have gone a little a longer way there. There were some times when he was chewing up the scenery just a little bit, just being a little bit too maybe self-indulgent in that in that performance a little bit, pulling back a little bit to show some nuance, to show some subtlety. I think would have gone very far. Go ahead, Mike.
If I may, don't you think he, like you said, he is a person who's obliterated worlds that he's created over and over and over again for the tiniest imperfections. Isn't that self-indulgent? Like this might be a heck, but I think, especially because I've seen him be such a reserved character before, I think that really goes with the character. He is this
I actually agree with Mike. I think it fits well, and that's where I think his performance worked well due to the backstory of the villain's character, for me anyways.
That's interesting. That's an interesting take on it. I haven't quite seen it that way. I still think, though, even attempting to convey that, though, I don't know. Yeah, like obviously you do want him to be indulgent in some parts, but I don't know. I would have had a more of a gradation of range there, because it seems to go from 3 to 10, 3 to 11, and there's not a lot of interplay in between there. I would have liked to have seen that a little bit more, but that's just me. Maybe that's just personal preference from my end. So I would have to. I'd like to see that villain develop, but the backstory, the and even aspects of the performance, I think they're there for a multi-phase villain for sure.
I'll give Kevin Davis a shout out for being in the chat. Thanks for being in the chat, Kevin. So my take on this, first of all, we've already established that anybody can be replaced at any time. I think him being a King variant is fine. I agree with both Mike and I agree with Dre. This is not my favorite performance of this actor. I thought he was amazing in Peacemaker. He was phenomenal in that. I think in this one, he is being asked to play a more cartoony villain. And let's be honest, he kind of has to be, because what he's doing, like just fully abusing animals, has to be portrayed as him as a cartoon. Or it's almost kind of, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we have to portray him as so cartoonish, because if we don't, who's going to believe that someone would do this and be this diabolical, right? And so I think he kind of has to play it a little bit over the top, to Dre's point. This is where it gets really interesting. Jonathan Majors is perhaps given zero CG enhancements, given zero voice modulation. He is up there with Killmonger, Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger, as the craziest, most intimidating villains, just by showing up on the screen as himself, acting like he's outstanding, right? Like whatever he's done in his personal life, his career, as short as it is amazing. And so both actors are awesome. I just don't know if I don't know if it'll work as seamlessly to transition those two as it might otherwise. I don't think, like Jonathan Majors, like the dude, let's be honest, probably roided up, but a just standing there is a presence that is unbelievable comparative to this other actor as a high evolutionary. So I'm not sure I'm completely sold on it from a actor to actor standpoint, but I am sold on it as a MCU's done this before. They can do it again. This guy is a fantastic actor, so why not give him a try at it, is kind of what I would say. Is he a top tier villain? For me, he's a little bit cartoony. I like this was what's interesting about what James Gunn has done with his villains in the second and third films. He's made the villains more about the character going through the arc and how that villain has hurt them in the past and how they're working through that hurt. then and so it's almost like you can put why am I blanking on this dude's name? The guy that plays the Celestial, Peter
Kurt
Quill's
Russell.
dad. Kurt Russell, thank you. It's like Hollywood royalty. I can't remember the guy's name. Kurt Russell is he just plays this like kind of good-natured kind of guy who's doing these nefarious things. But it's all about that character is all about how Peter responds. This character is all about how Rocket responds and how his friends around him will respond on his behalf. And so it's sort of a different take. I think Killmonger is not so much that. Killmonger is like I have to sit back and consider, how did Killmonger get to be where he is? Why does it make so much sense? And now I'm involved in this deep discussion of like, how could I find myself in that place, or how can my friends find themselves in that place, as opposed to this high evolutionary where it's like, I mean, you've got to be a complete monster to be this guy. So it's a different give and take that they're giving us here. But again, we talked about this earlier. The arcs that all these characters are going through in the Guardians, it's like like Mike said earlier, you can't do much with the villains. You know what I mean? Like, or as Dre pointed out, you have to build it up over time because you're so I'll use the word, you're so pregnant with character development that it's like, well, how am I going to bring in this other thing? We're already full. There's no more to go here. And I think that's part of it too. So I think that Marvel will have no problems recasting if they need to. And this is a great actor to do it. But I do think I'm nervous that you lose a little bit without having Jonathan Majors, because that guy is just from a professional standpoint, not a personal standpoint, the guy is ludicrous. So it's pretty cool. Oh, we have a question from the producer of the show, Mr. OG55. How can I not answer this question? This is a must answer. So OG asks, with the streaming landscape changing fast, less content but higher quality, etc., how does that change the trajectory of the MCU? Someone had brought up earlier on Twitter, I believe, last year we saw three Marvel shows all hit streaming just last year alone, and yet this year we haven't had anything yet. So what do you guys think? How does the streaming landscape, since it's changing so quickly, how is that affecting the trajectory of the MCU, Mike? Let's start with you. What do you think?
Slow down, please. I like if I'm frying out and I love this stuff, I know normal people, my wife is done. So many people I know are like, I just can't anymore. And I've had, there's a lot of ups and downs in the last couple of years, but I kind of wish they took like 2 years off post Endgame and make us just like gnawing and cannot wait. And then you're so excited to see these new characters, and maybe take some more time, because everything from Moon Knight and Miss Marvel, there's parts I liked, a lot I didn't, to Multiverse of Madness, right? There's just things that it's like, I don't know, maybe another draft, guys. Maybe you could have smoothed things out just a little more. And it just feels like it is this unending machine of like, we got to go. So when they were like, well, we'll do fewer movies and series and slow everything down, I'm really happy. And you can rewatch. There's enough content out there if you're only an MCU freak. You can just go back for a while. There's 30 movies and like 10 series already. So just like calm down, read a comic, and a movie you'll be at again soon.
The best way that I can kind of describe it is Marvel has a bad case of diarrhea and Star Wars has a bad case of constipation. It's like, that's like the best way that I could think of it. It's like Marvel has too much coming out at once, and Star Wars needs to like get that engine going, in my personal opinion. Because it's like we constantly wait for something, and I know I'm divulging into Star Wars, but it's like we get promised this and promised that, and things get delayed, things get pulled back, things get canceled, or what have you. And with Marvel, it's like one after the other, and it just becomes so much where it's like overstimulation. And it's like we need to kind of like, as Mike had pointed out, like, let's defuse it a little bit. Let us like reconfigure ourselves and then hype us up with something. And rather than as soon as we're done with one, okay, we got to immediately go into this one. It's like, it's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had this interesting landscape. Sorry, Dre, let me get to you in just a minute.
Please.
We had this interesting landscape change that's going on behind the scenes that the fans aren't seeing as well. And that is that, Disney went all in on Disney Plus, right, and said we got to have things on streaming if we're going to compete in this marketplace.
Right.
And then the pandemic happened, and Disney had lined up all of these shows to start coming out. And in fact, Kathleen Kennedy has been on record as saying that, you know, she's used to making movies, and she was told now make streaming TV shows. And so we got into this situation where all of these production schedules got kind of mixed up, and it was there was no such thing as Disney Plus. Disney Plus is the biggest thing that's ever happened to Disney. We need content for it, to now being like, stop all the things. Actually, there's a writer's strike brewing. We need to be profitable. Why are we doing all this? Asking to Mike's point and to George's point, asking creatives to do that, and then asking an audience to understand what's actually going on is almost impossible. You're asking them to do a job that's virtually impossible to do. So I have a lot of sympathy for that. But go ahead, Dre. What were you going to say?
You're fine. I'm actually glad that you provided that context, because that's kind of where I was going with it as well, right? There's been a lot happening behind the scenes affecting these major franchises, brands, and so forth, right? Because, I mean, Marvel, Star Wars, they were supposed to be pillars of this Disney Plus kind of business venture here, and now that's kind of on shaky ground, let's say, when it comes to profitability and otherwise, and its view from investors and so forth on Wall Street. It's like, oh, we have to kind of rethink this here. I do think that Iger's initial reaction, I believe he said this at the Morgan Stanley conference, that, oh, well, maybe we don't, do like a fourth Ant-Man film or something. Maybe we, bring out new stories, new characters, and all that. I thought, I don't know if that's necessarily the right call there, because I do think you have viable characters that you can actually produce films for, but it's really the quality of that project, right? It's like what Mike was saying. Hey, let's just rewrite this a little bit right there. Yeah. Like, hey, Doctor Strange, I'd love to see him in more stuff, but it's got to be, it's got to be well written. It's got to be compelling. There's a whole host of things that you have to do. It's not really the strength or weaknesses of the character. It really comes down to story, but that is something that they are at this time doing. We heard on the last earnings call for Disney, actually, they really kind of emphasized content curation, right? Not just the content that's actually on Disney Plus right now, but the content coming up, reducing the amount actually put out, and so forth. I do agree with you, George. They could increase the volume of maybe Star Wars content. A reduction of MCU content, I think, would do everybody a world of good. Not just audiences that might be trying to absorb all this stuff but can't, but also for MCU fans as well. I think we'll start to get better product from that choice as well there. So there's kind of a duality to it, in a way that I think will benefit the MCU as it progresses. I also want to say too, I think this movie really benefited by not being so interconnected with the rest of the MCU. And I've heard this from a lot of people. It's like, oh man, I can't see this one because I haven't seen all the rest of them. And it's like, well, but this film's really, really good. That can be a tough sell to do that. So, that will help in that aspect as well, I think. Just reducing it a little bit. And even if you do have interconnected content, you don't have so much to catch up on.
Yeah. Just to pick up on a couple of your points too, because Mike, you had mentioned that your wife dropped out of watching MCU stuff because it was just too much. My wife did the same thing, and not only did my wife do it, but I started to do it as well because, like you, Dre, I did not see Quantumania, right? And what happened there was
you should be lucky.
Well, I was getting pretty disenfranchised, right? I was getting pretty disenfranchised with what they were putting out, and I was getting also, I was also surprised by what they were putting out. I was not, for example, I love Silicon Valley, and I thought that She-Hulk was going to be really good because of the showrunner for that show was Jessica Gao, I believe, and she also worked on Silicon Valley. She worked on something else that I like too. I can't remember.
Rick and
what it was.
Morty.
Oh yeah, there you go, Rick and Morty. And so I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, okay, cool. I'm gonna get something here with She-Hulk that makes a lot of sense in this continuity and where we're going, and it just didn't work for me at all. Now sometimes that just happens, right? This show was probably scripted during the pandemic, so that's a challenge in and of itself. But it just didn't really work for me. So then I watched Ms. Marvel, and I kind of fast forwarded through a couple episodes because I love the actress playing Ms. Marvel. And I thought some of the episodes were great and some of the episodes were just kind of okay. And then it kind of just, I don't know, it's fine. I actually really wanted them to get back into her lineage more because I thought those episodes were awesome. But they kept kind of bringing it into like this kind of newer school kind of thought process. Anyway, all that to say, like my wife's sitting there watching the Marvels trailer going like, I don't know who this is. I only know one of, or probably knows Captain Marvel and probably remembers Monica Rambeau, maybe. But you're like cutting out fans. I haven't seen Quantumania, so I don't know what the variants of Kang actually are. I've seen a few GIFs. There's a lot of them. That's all I know, So it's interesting. And when you start to wait for some of these things to come out on streaming, like I'm waiting for Quantumania to come out on streaming, it really puts you behind on some of the core projects that they're working on. So I think just to pick up on what Marty Snyder and Aaliyah Aloha said here, Marty says it also gets worse when we get a bad Disney or Marvel show. And I think that is I think that's really true. Like if you imagine you have a train running down the tracks and one of the wheels goes bad, like it might not derail every single car. And some of us might keep going along on that train, no problem, but it's going to derail a couple cars because people are going to go, I don't have that much time to watch all this stuff. Aaliyah Aloha said too, the other magical word is accountability. And to Mike's point, I think that Kevin Feige has been spread too thin and there's not as much accountability. So, he can't have his stamp on all of it and make sure it's all going in the same direction. So, it just feels like it's like more and more disjointed.
That's just like, if I can jump in, Jay, just like
please.
in the comics, Jonathan Hickman has been the head of X, right? Every X-Men thing, he's the Kevin Feige of that. But then the Avengers has their own version of that. So I do think if Kevin Feige's at the top, why the Guardians are so strong across the board is Gunn kind of acted as that. And I do think if we gave each character a head and then they all answer to Feige to make sure that the widespread like macro narrative is going, but keep somebody who's close to the material who can keep working it and massaging it and make sure like every character line actually makes sense for that character, and that would work. I think Feige, it made sense, and somebody just said it was a great experiment. True, and now it's just getting more and more rickety because it just keeps growing.
Kind of like the Russo brothers, right? How they kind of like, hey, we took in Captain America, and we're gonna shepherd him a little bit as we go through not only his stories but also Avengers and so forth. I do think there's some value in that because it's gotten so big. You kind of need multiple hands in here and attaching a creative force to a character. Kind of having a brain trust there, probably the right call. It's a fascinating thing the MCU is. But go ahead, Jay. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that, no. I was going to pick up on what you were saying because I totally agree. Russo brothers did the exact same thing, which is great. So Gunn has done it. Russo brothers have done it. They made a giant mistake they handed something off to Taika, who, by the way, has created one of my favorite movies in the last decade in Jojo Rabbit, which is just a phenomenal film. But Taika took over for Ragnarok and did a pretty good job. And everyone went, yeah, cool. I believe they just gave him, $250 million and said, go make another Thor film. You don't have that much time, by the way. Make it fast. And they gave us what they gave us. They also then gave us the same thing with, in my opinion, the same thing with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where it was kind of like even Sam Raimi and even Bruce Campbell was like, I don't even know what movie we were making because they were asking us to film new stuff all the time. So when you don't have somebody caretaking, let's remember too that Doctor Strange went from being a Scott Derrickson project to a Sam Raimi project two very different directors in the horror genre, by the way. It just doesn't work. So yeah, I think that's a great point, Mike. It's like, it's not only the point person in Kevin Feige, because there's way too much going on for him to do everything, but it's also the generals, if you will, that he puts underneath him. And we'll see how that shakes out over time. Go ahead, Dre.
And yeah, definitely the creatives are going to be a force here going forward. But that's the kind of the beneficial thing about doing less content. You need less of them around, right? I mean, that's the tricky part. There's not, there is not an unending supply of really great talent in Hollywood, right? So lessen how much content you actually produce, and now people are spread less thin. Also, too, quality I think is going to be a big point here. Even, I mean, we're hearing Disney cutting back and so forth, and they are, but you can get better films, produce less of them, and end up spending less money. For example, right? Let's say you allocate like $1 billion towards like 10 different projects, right? Well, each one of those probably gets like 100 million or so. This is just kind of hypothetical right there. Well, if you cut back on how much you're spending, right? Maybe you're spending $800 million rather than $1 billion. And you cut back on maybe how many of those things you actually produce. Maybe it's down to like 4 or something like that. Well, now you can have $200 million dedicated to each one of those things, and you're spreading that money around on better stuff in a more productive and efficient way. So that's kind of the thought process going there in Burbank as it relates to not only the Marvel MCU but with a lot of their content. And I think it will help it. To Mike's point, I fully agree with you, Mike. A little bit too much too fast. Slow it down a little bit. Give people a compelling reason to come back in the theaters, for sure.
And that's where it works for the Guardians of the Galaxy. When anytime that I think of Guardians of the Galaxy, I immediately think of James Gunn. And again, as we had mentioned before, personal views aside as a person, but as a writer, as a film director, it's anytime that I was looking forward to the Guardians of the Galaxy, it's because Gunn's hands were on it.
True.
And it's like, whether it was the films, whether it was the Christmas special, hell, whether it's Mission Breakout over at DCA, anything that involves Guardians of the Galaxy, you can feel how Gunn's directions to the characters, to the story, it is all him. And you can kind of see the difference, like when you have the Guardians characters in, just to say, Love and Thunder or what have you, you still see the characters as themselves, but you can see a little bit of that quality pulled out of it because it's not necessarily James Gunn directing it. And that's what happens. These characters get lost in translation because they're being bounced around from different film directors who have a different take on what these characters should be. And that's where I feel like the Guardians have that stronghold, because a majority of the time it was done by one director.
That's a good point. Rousseau Brothers did a great job of taking other people's characters and incorporating them. I wonder if they ended up talking to the other directors or something first, because they seem to really get it. Now we're going to get into the really deep question. This is the question. We didn't get this one question from Twitter. This one came from my own head. But this film touches on some deep emotional themes. Most of the fans that I've heard from, including myself, shed a few tears watching this film. So what themes were meaningful to you, and what made you tear up in this film? Dre, I'll start with you.
Man, this one's definitely darker than some of the previous entries into the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, but also too in the MCU. I mean, this is really kind of profound issues at play here, right? Obviously, one is redemption, as we talked about before. But I mean, yeah, like how much does your past actually define you? At what point to obtain perfection, how far do we actually go in order to do that, right? And the pitfalls from that kind of philosophy and thinking and mentality and so forth. There's also, topics like, I can't say it on YouTube, but when you're exterminating a peoples, right, or a race of being, that's like, whoa, that's really strong and so forth. The bonds of friendship. It's just got a lot of stuff there that's like it's really compelling. Moving on, right? Really compelling stuff there, and it's unfortunate because this movie's so hyper packed that. And I'll get into it later on in the discussion when it comes to other questions. But one of the things that kind of holds me back from giving it a higher grade, this film, is that there's so much in there that doesn't have, like, some of these things don't have room to breathe as much as I would like them to, right? I thought less could have been more in this particular case, but it hits on a lot of stuff that's like, hey, if you would have told me that an otter with kind of robotic prosthetics, right, and a raccoon character could make you tear up before, I would have called you crazy. But James Gunn just has a way of really bringing out that emotional quality in just a profound way, with not even just characters half the time, just abstract things or whatever, and it's just like, wow, this is really amazing stuff right there. I gave it up to James Gunn. Phenomenal work here.
Yeah. What about you, George? What made this emotionally relevant for you?
Well, I love the aspect, and I told Dre and OG this when they called me after the fact I left the theater. And the one thing that I could have appreciated out of Volume 3 with the other two is you kind of get to know the core of the characters in the first two. You kind of feel the mod, it's like what is a little bit of their backstory, but it's kind of like that mysterious type of feel. You don't really get to really know them until like the story progresses, where with Volume 3, it kind of sums up everything of how they are individualized rather than just as a group. And there's a lot of hard-hitting moments of emotion between Peter and Rocket and his friends as he was growing up before he became an outcast, so to speak. And then, of course, the whole notion of a particular race being obliterated in their own world and like with no control over it. I mean, it's a lot. It definitely pulls on your heartstrings. But I have to say, the one part that really hit me the most, especially, well, I guess since you asked, because I am going to take this as like how it hits for me personally, is I'm currently going through some stuff in my life. And at the very end, when they kind of all say their goodbyes, it's the whole notion of they are still the Guardians of the Galaxy. They are still family, but you have to kind of find your way in life, and sometimes you have to remove yourself from certain situations or from certain things just to kind of find yourself. And that it was a bittersweet moment, and I didn't really think of really anything of it, but of what has transpired in my own life, I could actually relate to that final scene where they're all kind of saying their goodbyes to one another, but they all kind of still have that tight bond, but they just had to go to kind of find out who they really were as individuals.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff. What do you think, Mike? What hit you?
Yeah, I think I agree with George. That was really impactful. It's so rare we see in pop culture in general, and especially in superhero stuff, where like a chapter's ending, not because there was a world ender and somebody died, but like in a very realistic, like, you have to move on, because that's just kind of what life is a series of you're growing and then you plateau and then you grow and you plateau and you have to move on. I think that was super effective. I love how they did that with Peter and Gamora. I was cringing through the whole movie. I was like, don't let them get back together. She is, and like the fact, and that this feels to me so James Gunn controlled. Like, I do think a lesser creator would be like, oh, clearly they should be together, right? But that Peter has grown so much, and we've seen him mature through all the movies, and him admitting it was kind of his fault that Thanos killed half of everybody, and that him finally accepting Gamora's truth is she's not that same person, and that he has to let her go. But I think the stuff that made me get dusty, it was it was probably a couple times, but when Rocket sits up and Peter hugs him, and then Groot hugs him. That's friendship, man. Friendship and found family stuff will always get me, and I think it did it really well.
Yeah. I think now Aaliyah is going to be really disappointed with me. Aaliyah in the chat. I am really, really, really tired of hero's journey stories. The hero's journey has been a part of Hollywood like time and again, over and over and over. It is a powerful story. I get it. I think it's best utilized in Lord of the Rings. I think it's used to some degree to be really strong in some other properties like Star Wars. But I love it when we break some of the notions of what the hero's journey is into what is sort of like real people, really fully realized people, even if they're a rocket raccoon or a tree person, making decisions that are difficult, making decisions that are gray, making decisions that hurt the people around them. That to me is just stands out as being very powerful because it is much more like our existence.
Yes.
There is our existence isn't this thing where we just, like you said, Mike, we don't just keep getting better and better and better because we meet the wizard and the wizard helps us achieve. And, it's like, no, that's not really what life is like. In fact, life is almost more like what Rocket goes through, which is saying, I had this traumatic experience. And by the way, the trauma that was enacted on him is actually not the trauma that he struggled with the most, because he had trauma that someone else, the high level evolutionary, forced upon him. Then he took that and he was okay with it because he found family with the other people who had experienced trauma, and they built up a community around themselves to be able to move forward. And it wasn't until those people died at the high evolutionary's hand that Rocket really went into where we see him in Guardians of the Galaxy 1, which is a full criminal. He's like, I don't care about people at all. I care about this tree, kind of. Everyone else can go, pound sand. And I think that, but what you see here is you see Rocket end his journey by saying, look, I don't need to exact revenge on this guy. Like that was my final thing that I had to overcome with this trauma. And knowing that having a vision of where he's going to end up with his found family, and saying, it's okay. I don't need to make forced trauma on other people. I don't need to do that because I know what my end is going to be. That stuff was insanely powerful to me. And the fact that we could see that exemplified through innocent creatures was even more powerful, because we know that their innocence is taken from them. They find joy in each other and in the exploration of the world. And then there's trauma on the back end of that too. And I think that was really, really powerful. Mike, you brought it up. The other thing that was great was they did not get Peter and Gamora together. Phenomenal choice. It would have felt so awkward if they would have forced that otherwise. I do think that if we get to it, we'll get to it. But I do think Gamora is a weird character because I don't fully understand. Maybe you guys do. I don't fully understand what Gamora we're even dealing with, because she seems different than a lot of the past Gamoras that we've seen. I'm very confused.
She's not 2014 Gamora, that's for sure.
Exactly.
She's something else, and I don't know.
Weird.
We'll get into it.
Yeah, we'll get into it. But Rocket and Aaliyah says, by the way, Aaliyah said earlier, she's too much hero's journey, but not enough heroine's journey. I agree with that. Rocket showed us so much humanity and leadership when he made the decision for him, followed by all the others to attack to help free the kids and the other animals. One of the things that was brought up, I'll just leave this here real quick and we'll move on. But one of the things I'll say is somebody made a really good point that the transition between who leads the Guardians of the Galaxy was made when Peter was like, we're going to kill the high evolutionary. And when Rocket Raccoon said, no, we're not, we don't need to kill him. And that was Peter is no longer in the place where he can lead this team effectively, but Rocket Raccoon is. That was amazingly powerful too. So that was not my theory. That was somebody else's. And I'm like, that, I wish I could give credit. I don't know who it was, but that was legit. I like that a lot. All right. You guys ready to move on to the next one? All right.
Yep, let's go.
Okay, so this is an easy question. There's a lot that works really well in this film. There's some things that maybe don't work quite as well. I'll start with you on this one, Mike. What do you think worked best for you in this film, and what do you think fell short a little bit?
I know we're gonna get to Gunn later, but I find it impossible to talk about this without talking about James Gunn.
Yeah,
as
go
a
for it.
director.
Thanks.
What he does so well is find the balance between like his horror background, the grotesqueness of things, and sentiment and sweetness. So when he's on fire, it's a perfect blend of that. But he can often, the pendulum can swing just a little. And so what worked really well for me, and I did not expect, is the gross living. We saw Ego the Living Planet, but then actual alive planet station where everything was fleshy. I loved that. And that felt like his Slither days. It was so nasty and it made me laugh. And that worked for me. I think there's so many good moments of found family and friendship throughout all the films, but throughout this one. But I did not need little cartoon otters constantly just saying, it's good to have friends. Is it, Lila? No shit. Shut up. Like, it got so, I was like, I get it. The rest of the movie saying the same thing, but it was just like pounded in over and over and over again. I was like, I cannot with this. So that stuff lost me. Those were that was like the biggest thing that I remember now, a couple weeks out, really bothering me. But for the most part, yeah, even though my grade was the lowest of here, I guess I'm harsh because I loved so much of it, and just juggling all of the people. I was so impressed with how you can continue to arc this to make Nebula. Like, if the Guardians are D-list, Nebula is even further down, and to make us care about her so much and have her have grown so much at this point. When they were all saying goodbye and they're all like, here's my next step of the journey, all of it worked so much, from Drax the Destroyer to Drax the Dad. Like, all of it was impactful, and it's really impressive.
Yeah, just to pick up on that really quick because of Nebula, the scene where Peter is wondering if he should have a crush on Nebula instead of Gamora, and he's like, oh, he chose such beautiful dark eyes. That scene was that portion of that scene was 100%
Ad-lib?
what do you call it? Yeah, ad-libbed. It was 100% ad-libbed. It was, and I think the reason it works is because of the characters know themselves so well. Peter knows I'm lost without Gamora, and he's trying to find somebody to connect to, right? Like, it's like, well, anybody will do right now because I'm alone in the world, right? So yeah, and having Nebula realize what's going on and having that awkward scene and being able to pull that off as comedy was fantastic. So it's a great point.
It felt grounded and real, even in the living station because they're both awkward, but there's a moment of them like, and like a lot of people, when you have friends and you're suddenly single, you're like, well, I've never looked at you that way before. So they both had a brief moment of like, maybe. And it felt like, again, like those moments of realness in like the most ludicrous of all the Marvel things. I think that's what makes it hit so hard. And the, like, he's good at runners. The one that worked for me was Nathan Fillion's like, oh, you got a loser employee too. Like that little growing bit I liked a lot. The Sean Gunn and Cosmo, like the, you will call me a good dog, less so. It's not as bad as Volume 2's runner of like, his name's Taserface. That is my least favorite kind of joke.
Very bad.
You named him. Shut up. That's not funny.
Right.
Yeah.
And beat it to death.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go backwards. How about you, George? What do you think? What were some of your highlights? What are some of the things that didn't work for you as well?
Yeah, I think for me as a whole, I mean, the film is still very strong. It's hard for me to depict to say, oh my God, this was bad, this was horrible. However, there are a few things that was a bit cringeworthy, I will say that. And it primarily had to do with the overall aesthetic look of the animals themselves on the planet. And I had a kind of an issue with that from the very beginning, from when they dropped the trailer. I know Gunn's perception of trying to convey of, like a mutation with these animals to kind of have their own hybrid in humanity and what have you. But it just kind of lost it with me with the visuals and everything. And especially because it kind of gave me that Zootopia type vibe meets Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, I'm not saying it was like it ruined it for me, but it just lost in translation for me. And then there were certain aspects where, I'm trying how to put this delicately, certain instances on the planet where the animals were involved in not so good things that humans do, primarily on the streets, where even though it was like briefly, it was just like, okay, I mean, I can get it, but it's like, you're kind of going off the rails for me a little bit right there. I do agree with what Mike was saying with like just like the obnoxiousness of like just the constant of the repeating. But I mean the overall of of this the story, but more so of the character arc. That is what I can relate to the most with the Guardians, is the characters themselves. And there's just a lot that's going on in this film that I can personally take and find myself within them, that I never really focused on that before, until something occurs that you can say, wow, this is relatable. And it's not just a film that you go for entertainment purposes, just say this is a kick-ass film, but something that you can walk out of the theater and say, I can relate to this particular character, or I can relate to this kind of situation. And it's a coping mechanism, if you will, because it's like you feel in the moment that there are people out there who can understand what one person could be going through in another. And that's what I feel the Guardians as a whole has done, especially with the wrap up of this film. I mean, it hits close to home with family, with a team, with just everything that accumulates. And I said it on Twitter, and I'll say it again. This was a perfect love letter from James Gunn that he has given us as fans of the franchise.
That's really good. By the way, Aaliyah Aloha said it was EA Voss from New Rockstars that talked about the leadership change between Rocket and Peter Quill, and that is correct. That is exactly who I was watching when that came out. Dre, what do you think? What really made it powerful for you? What are some of the things that maybe were taken away from this film?
There's some definitely, and look, to Mike's point there, he lays it on pretty thick there, but the relationship of Rocket between the characters of his friends, right? It's thickly laid on because there's only so much screen time in order to have that, and so you really have to have a kind of a deep emotional connection and investment there. Maybe a little bit too much for sure, but the payoff is, man, it is pretty rewarding there, and it kind of makes you think of Rocket very differently. With that context applied, which is what they were going for to achieve very spectacularly. So I thought those were, some of the best sequences of the entire film. Less, some grading comments for sure, Drax really kind of raises his rankings along with Nebula for sure. I mean, these were characters that I don't know if anybody would particularly call them their favorites when talking about the Guardians of the Galaxy characters, to let's say the normies, but they really stood out here in a really great, amazing way, and that was really great to see. The visuals are extremely impressive. Amazing VFX work right there. I can. What is it? When you see it kind of thing. Great VFX work throughout. Just phenomenal stuff there. Which, by the way, is this Victoria Alonso's last film with the MCU?
Oh, good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it might have been. I don't know if she contributed to work coming up here. But hey, going on a high note, good stuff here. I think my main criticisms is, I think there's a slightly better film here than what we got, and that makes me frustrated. Like, it's just it's a little bit too long, a little bit unfocused, a little bit unpolished, and I would have liked to have seen, maybe the runtime slimmed down just a tad, maybe a combination of sequences so that it wasn't so spread out. And obviously there has to be some of that taking place because you do have so many characters to actually kind of focus on, but maybe then, I don't know, reduce how many characters that you actually have. That way it's a little bit more focused on some of the good elements, and those are kind of emphasized. I don't know, controversial takes for sure, but that's kind of the way I felt. I also felt the music wasn't quite to the degree of maybe the previous two, the music selections and so forth, and where that music was actually placed. This is a defining thing of the Guardians series, so you want to get this music right. Where it's actually placed, and the genre and so forth, it's just so perfect with the visuals that you're actually seeing on screen. I thought that it wasn't so good here. With the music selection and the tying up of like themes or visuals that were on screen. I just thought, this kind of feels like James Gunn going through his music collection and just kind of throwing some stuff up there rather than this kind of really thought out deep process of this song is perfect for this moment, that kind of thing. And also Gamora, particular interest with this one because, like, obviously Gamora had a character arc, right? She started at a certain place, and when we, saw her get thrown off the cliff by her father, like that's an arc right there. This Gamora is like completely outside of that arc entirely, like a different person. I understand you kind of you want to do that in order to establish, hey, this isn't the Gamora that you remember, but then like canonically and just doing the math in my head, it's like, yeah, but this is like way different. This is not even just a different version of this character; it's a different character entirely. Which I understand you that's what you want to establish, but she was just like so unlikable. It was kind of off-putting. I felt not only to the cohesion of the team, but for the audience members around me, and I thought that could have been better handled.
Do you think that's why James Gunn went that route? Do you think he kind of played it safe so that way by the end, when Peter and Gamora went their separate ways, it wasn't as strong of an impact on the audience per se to say, oh man, this really could have worked, where throughout the whole film it's like, okay, this is like not going anywhere, so there's less of a sting,
it was just so much that it was like, if she winds up with Star-Lord, I am going to throw my remote at the TV screen. Like it was it just a little bit too much. Take it back a little bit. Don't, I think a little bit more nuance would have gone a long way with that character, because I don't know, she was almost off-putting, which is sad because I like Gamora. I wanted a different version of that character, but not necessarily a different character entirely.
I mean, I definitely can understand where you're coming from with that, because even though she was with the Guardians throughout this whole film, it was like she had her own standalone moments. Like, it wasn't where you're so used to seeing her kind of moving with the motions of the Guardians rather than her just kind of being there in the background rather than
which
the
is
forefront.
Fine. Like, have her do her own thing. That's fine. But, it's just, it was a lot to take in. That specific character. Go ahead, Mike. You were wanting to say something.
I think there are two reasons that the Gamora arc is one, this is her if she had not met the Guardians when she did. They all grew together, right? And so this is Gamora pre-Volume 1 who did not go through the same moments because they all were immature, backstabby pieces of garbage and then grew into better people together. And she just didn't have that. And I think it's also very much flipped that her and Nebula are flipped roles of where they were in Volume 1. Sure. Nebula now has grown so much, and it's showing and it almost shows dogging Gamora's character arc to show how much Nebula has grown now, that she is now the more empathetic sister.
But I never disliked Nebula, though. That's the weird thing. You know what I'm saying? And I think Alia makes a good point here. This Gamora in Volume 3, I couldn't see her betraying Ronan and doing what she planned to do in Volume 1. That kind of thing. It just doesn't... I don't know. It just there was something out of sequence there, and I'm not sure what it was. But Mike, I do agree with you. I understand the reasons why, and those are compelling reasons why, and maybe why you should, do those things. But it's just maybe I wouldn't have done them that way.
How do we actually get this Gamora? Like as a person who's seen just about everything the MCU has ever done, who tries to understand all of what's going on, where does she come from? This is a re-blipped.
Okay, so
Gamora?
Yeah, so remember in the plot of Endgame,
right,
they all go back in time, right?
Right.
And there's kind of like this multiverse timeline, but it's okay. They go back in time in order to get the stones from various points, right? And in one of those points, it is right before Gamora meets up with Star-Lord, essentially, right, Mike? If I'm not mistaken. And that Gamora gets transported via her father's vessel, right?
Because they find the two nebulas are brain linked, and so they start using future nebula to figure stuff out. And
so Nebula and Gamora are transported through that.
Got it.
That the bad version of Nebula is killed, right, at the end of Endgame, and then that's how we're getting. So it's Gamora, but it's 2014. It's weird because it's this is her arc, and she's here, and I'm like, how do we get there? I'm I'm missing something here, I guess.
Just to pick up on before I get into mine, Marty did say that he liked the soundtrack, and I will say that there's a couple times I love the Florence and the Machine drop in here. I thought that was amazing.
100%.
And I also really liked the we always talk in Star Wars rhymes or whatever, right? And they had I believe as the new Guardians team is running out, they're playing the song from the original when Peter's entering to steal the orb with the power stone, right?
The orb.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool too. The fact that they could start and end on the same kind of vibe was really cool. So for me, the one thing that we have not talked about, it's kind of indicated in the CG comments you made, Dre, which I agree is that's amazing CG. But I thought one of the coolest scenes was we got all this emotional stuff, which I found absolutely phenomenal. You don't find yourself crying in comic book movies very often. I thought that was great. But we also got an amazing hallway scene where the fight was amazing.
Pretty good.
Yeah, and everybody got their little moment in that fight, and to your point, the CG was awesome. I thought that was really, really cool. I also think there's somebody on Twitter made this point, and I offered a counterpoint to them, which I'll offer to you guys now, and then they didn't respond to me, so they didn't really feel like talking about it. But somebody wrote this big article about how great it is that they could spend all this time talking about how they shouldn't kill people and they should just avoid that style of fighting and stuff like that. And they go, but then there's a big hallway scene where they kill a bunch of people. And my comment back was, I totally understand what you're saying, but also this is sort of the world that James Gunn has put us in, is that when you can do the small things, you should do them, but you can't always do the small things because the world is a dark place too, right? Like, and I thought it worked really well. I thought it was like, no, that's fine. It's a cool scene and it doesn't bother me.
Also, I want to shout out the color palette of the Gunn films. You know, they're very distinctive, and I like how they applied that mentality again for this one. This one's a little bit more desaturated than the others, with more emphasis on certain colors than others. But man, oh man, does it really kind of match what's really going on screen right there, and the themes and so forth, and the darker tone of it all. Yeah, look, you got to give it up to James Gunn. He's a pretty damn good filmmaker. I mean, no question there.
Absolutely. So all the other stuff we talked about, I loved. The one thing that detracted a little bit. So why is it not a 10, right? So why did I take off a half point? I clearly loved the film. Some of the humor feels a little old. It's the same joke. What if we call each other morons again? What if we call each other idiots again? It's like, when you've heard it so many times, especially if you've watched Peacemaker, especially if you've watched The Suicide Squad, it's the same humor. And I think that it can still work, but it can also be a little bit like, I think I've heard this all before.
Little taser face.
I will say, though, as opposite to that, I mean, I do agree with you as a whole, but the one comedic mic drop for me, which was the best of the best, and I give credit to oh my gosh, now I'm having a brain fart. Actor who plays Peter Quill,
Chris Pratt.
Oh, geez, Louise.
It's infectious.
It is. Is when he dropped the F-bomb in the car. I'm sorry. For me, it was done with such taste. It wasn't overplayed, and it was just like his reaction with Nebula and going back and forth between her trying to open the door to the car. I mean, it would again, all James Gunn, like that just screamed Gunn all the way. But of how Chris Pratt, absolutely, of how Chris Pratt portrayed that moment, that was, yes, we did have that too. Everybody, there was not one seat that wasn't bawling with laughter just by that one line.
It was earned.
That's cool. Yeah, yeah, very much earned. Okay, so let's get to I'm going to leave this one. I'm going to leave this one for people in the chat, or if you're watching later and you want to comment on this one, we're going to skip this question just in the interest of time, and we're going to jump to the last question. But for everyone in the chat, this is what we want to hear from you. Another prompt we got this from Theme Park Wizard too, not my question. Theme Park Wizard's question. What do we all think of the new team? Are they a suitable replacement as the new Guardians of the Galaxy? So you leave us that comment in in the live chat or in the comments after you've seen this video. We're going to move on to the last question I have for us here. And who should I start with? Should I pick on our guest and have Mike start out on this one, or do you guys want
go
to
for it?
Okay, Mike, you get the first question. And I think this is not fair because I know Mike's opinion on Zack Snyder's DC stuff, so now I gotta get his opinion on James Gunn stuff. Do you think James Gunn has cemented himself as one of the best comic book movie directors of all time yet? And whether or not that's true for you, what do you think about him taking over for DC?
Yeah, I think he gets what makes characters. He did it with Guardians and then with the Suicide Squad, where people are like, who are these characters? It does not matter. It does not matter who these characters are. If you've heard of the IP before, he's going to inject humanity and groundedness. And like what he's so good at is Peter and Rocket have a lot of similarities, but they're very distinct individuals. And to be able to thread that, I'm constantly impressed with him, and I've been into James Gunn since I was like in middle school, so maybe I'm 2 in the bag for what he does. But yeah, I think he is one of the better, and that he's not shy. He's not, even though there's like the Star-Lord, that's a dumb name in Volume 1, but he doesn't think comics are stupid. So many of the creators of these movies, and it's going away, are like, why would we wear yellow spandex? And he's just like, no, they're superheroes. They're aliens. It's big and it's bright and it's fun, and it should be, because that is comics. It doesn't need to be all militaristic. And I think he just gets what makes comics work and can translate to the screen. And I'm ecstatic because to have somebody who I like heading DC. I like DC Comics. I have a DC tattoo. I'm a fan, but modern DC movies not a fan of. And I think he's going to shepherd it really well for all those reasons of why is this character different than this. And I'm pumped that he is the writer director of Superman, and I understand the maybe trepidation of because he goes, his edgelord humor doesn't always work, but I think he will. Superman is a big, goobery, heart of gold character, and I think Gunn is going to have that nailed down in a way we have not seen in a long time. In a way, certainly Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder always hated and feared Superman, and that's not what you should take. Like,
yeah.
So
That's great.
I'm excited.
Yeah. So what about you, Dre? Are you excited? Are you looking forward to what Gunn is going to do here?
Oh yeah. Well, DC needs an injection of life, and really kind of has to map out a cohesive world in which these characters can really kind of all not only be in but also interact in. And unfortunately, this is from the Zack Snyder version on. We just really haven't gotten that kind of cohesive vision. And I think James Gunn, if there's any other person to do it, I think James Gunn, I think he is that person. So I think it's really going to be exciting to see what he actually brings to the DC comic space. I'm very excited, and it'll be interesting to see, if the Flash really does well, which Zazzy's hoping for, that's for sure. Do you incorporate some of those things in here? Do you completely do away with what came before? Do you incorporate old aspects that may have worked in some way, but need to be taken in a slightly different direction in order to really kind of work on screen? It's going to be a really interesting process to see that go through its kind of development cycle for sure. I'm very interested. He's definitely one of the best. Is he the best? That's tough because you have some good ones up there. I mean, look, Christopher Nolan. He produces Christopher Nolan films, so let's not put him in the same camp as everybody else who has contributed to these comic book films before. Russo brothers, for me, they're really high, but here's the thing, though. Russo brothers had some amazing characters to work with. James Gunn had the Guardians to work with. And before any of the films came out, I mean, anybody looking at that is like, well, that's a little bit unenviable, right? But to he's made them top tier characters now, which is phenomenal. So you got to give it up to him for that for sure. I'm really excited about his future. I'm really excited about the future of DC. And honestly, Marvel needs a really good DC because if comic book movies keep coming out with their kind of below average, that'll hurt Marvel as well. And I think it already has. It has happened. So a better DC is a better Marvel. And hey, who knows? You have James Gunn, who's got Kevin Feige's number on speed dial. Who knows what could happen in the future? If
Amalgam.
That's right.
Yeah, one of the things that Peter Safran and James Gunn have said is that they are completely open to and in favor of Elseworld stories, which means that not all stories need to be in continuity. And I think that's a really great solution for if the Flash does well, if the Batman does well. We've got another Joker film coming out. None of those things are in continuity with what James Gunn is planning for.
Sure.
And so that's something that Marvel has never announced and has never acted on. And so Marvel has to deal with that. Whatever they're doing, they have to deal with the continuity fact. Whereas I think DC is open to, if somebody brings us a phenomenal script, we'll make it. Which I think is really cool. George, what do you think? Is the DCU off to a good start, and is James Gunn one of the best comic book directors of all time?
I think that he's on that path to becoming, if he is successful with DC, I think that he could actually hold that status for sure, because DC has been struggling for years to find it's definitely had an identity crisis of like, which route is it going? And I think not one director, not saying that they're good or bad, it's just the visionaries of what to do with these characters. It just hasn't come to the best of what these characters are in cohesive of doing, because in fact I'm a huge fan of DC, believe it or not. I'm more of a Marvel fan than DC, but I feel that why I'm not a bigger DC fan is because of the films. I was a huge fan of the animated series growing up. That's how I can connect with DC over Marvel. But the live action films, that's where it's lost in translation for me. It's like there's no cohesiveness between the characters and the storyline, and it's just I feel that James Gunn will bring something to DC that he only knows. We could only suspect that, this is the route he's going to go. But I think he's going to surprise us and really give us something to say, you know what, I'll pay $20 a ticket to go see this thing. And that's where I feel, as a master storyteller, James Gunn kind of reminds me of another James filmmaker, James Cameron, in the sense where you can give him something and you would think, you know what, people are going to shit all over it. It's going to be crap, but yet people take their butts to the cinemas anyway to see it, because they just have this persona about them that they can take something and make it their own. And you could say, you know what, that is a James Gunn film. This is a James Cameron film. And as Dre had said, this is something that needs to be done. And I agree with both of them, Mike and Dre, that I feel that James Gunn will succeed and really inject something into the DC universe. And quite frankly, it would be probably the most, and Dre and I had touched upon this a little bit after I had seen the film, of them combining a Marvel DC hybrid sort of thing, like intertwining that. I mean, if James Gunn can spearhead that and start that revolution, I mean, talk about a master filmmaker if that could be done. But it has to be done well. It can't just be done just for the sake of doing it. It has to be done with taste.
I know that people keep speculating on if they'll do like a Marvel DC crossover. I can't imagine, and I apologize for everyone listening who wants that, I can't imagine a more stupid decision on their part. Like, why set yourselves up for there to be all kinds of potential problems about, how do you negotiate this character gets enough screen time and that character gets enough screen time and this character can die.
That was one of the topics that he and I were talking about. Like, how does that translate onto the screen? And plus, who would have, like, how would you introduce that? Like, does Marvel get the more, screen time over the DC and everything? And as I said, if it is done, It has to be done well, but not before DC adapts its own identity as a forefront against Marvel. I don't want to say against, but give them good, healthy competition.
Yeah, and OG says Who Framed Roger Rabbit had that same issue, and that's true. But Who Framed Roger Rabbit was essentially a new character being created, and the environment around wasn't Marvel versus DC. It was like these characters appear, but the film is very focused on these other set of characters that is interacting. And I just think that when you'd be faced with what you'd be faced with is basically you'd have to do an Avengers type of movie where it was just a big bash fighting each other thing. You couldn't really get too deep into it. I think that might be not the kind of movie that I'm excited about in any way, shape, or form. So maybe it's just me. But to answer the question about, I'm super excited about DC. Oh, I almost lost you guys. My screen went to sleep again. I'm super excited about DC, and I do believe at this point, I personally could give James Gunn the award for being the best comic book movie director that I can think of. And that is because I have not seen him whiff. I loved the first Wonder Woman, and I don't know what happened, but 1984 was not good. It was not good. So I was thinking, like, Patty Jenkins is awesome, and then what is this, right? Zack Snyder has whiffed. The Russo brothers maybe have not whiffed on a comic book film, but they have also produced films or directed films that I'm like, I'm not sure. Right. James Gunn, like he took David Ayers, who is a great director, took Suicide Squad and did not make a good film. Now, heavily studio messed with, apparently, so we'll give him a benefit of the doubt. James Gunn comes in and makes a phenomenal The Suicide Squad film. Like, again, talk about characters they have Polka Dot Man. It's like ridiculous. Peacemaker, I thought, you know what? There's no way that John Cena can lead not just a comic book film, or a series, but a serious one that has a lot of emotional depth to it. James Gunn comes in and goes, "Sorry, man, this is what I'm giving you," and it's amazing. Like, the guy he's not whiffed. Even Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which we could all say is like maybe not a great film, it's still a good film. You know what I mean? Like, it's still a decent film. And so I have to say, like, I think I would go ahead and give him the title at this point in time. It's his to lose. Christopher Nolan, I agree with you, Dre. He's one of my favorites of all time. I don't think he gets the emotional depth that James Gunn does. Everything he does is a little bit more grounded in like realism from a execution standpoint, while James Gunn is more realism from an emotional standpoint, which is interesting to play between the two.
Very much so.
Yeah, but again, I don't see Christopher Nolan as a comic book movie director the way I do see James Gunn that way. And I think I would still give the title to him. So, man, we'll see. It's a good discussion. I'm excited about DC, but I also appreciate you guys for joining me. Anything else that anybody wants to bring up before we close out the show?
I think OG has a question.
Oh, here we go. OG has the last question. OG will get the last question of the show. Off topic a bit, but why do you guys think Bob Iger has been so hesitant to go bold with new leadership, new vision at Disney? Kennedy, Jennifer Lee, etc., like Warner Brothers has with DC.
Well, you only have to look so far as some of the recent box office performance for that. I mean, it's just, they've had some creative struggles. It's very self-evident now. And maybe that might be same thing facing Kevin Feige, maybe too much, too soon, too fast, or being pushed and pulled in multiple directions, in streaming, out of streaming, all that. Those things could have a profound effect on any studio. But I think it's very clear that the creatives, some of the choices that have been made from the last couple of years haven't necessarily resonated fully with audiences, and so I think that's why Iger's very much on. I mean, if you're going to have a creatively led direction, right? Well, then I think that's why the accountability part is part of that philosophy, because it's like, I can't give you all the power if you're just going to squander it. So I got to hold you accountable to that. But at the same time, you really have to empower the right people. And that's what it's all about. And I think for Iger, I think there are a couple people who maybe aren't in the positions that will see their studio see untapped potential or be successful in the way that Iger wants.
Anybody else have a take on this? I got one, but I'll wait for you guys. Why hasn't Iger made bigger moves?
Did you want to go? Did you want to go, Mike?
Mine's try. I think he hasn't needed to as much as DC had to. Like similar to what Jay was saying, like box office, like he just doesn't. The necessity is not there yet.
Yeah. I think when it comes to, I mean, there have been shortcomings with Disney at the box office, but I think it's the anticipation of what's coming up, and I think Alia had mentioned, like for instance, like with Indiana Jones coming up and Wish coming out with Disney Animation and Elemental coming out with Pixar. I think these are kind of titles that he is envisioning that they're going to be heavy hitters at the box office. And I think those are going to be the three films that are going to depict whether or not that he has to then make the next decision if these are epic failures.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Pete Docter can't get Elemental right, it's like, okay, well, should I really have you at the head of a studio, right? If Wish comes out, right, and it's like, oh, Jennifer Lee, it's like you couldn't make this work, even though you had all the pieces in order to make it work. Maybe I just you like. The upcoming slate will reveal a lot, and I do agree with you, George. I think he's kind of waiting and kind of seeing, like, do I need to step in, or can they handle it themselves?
And WB seems to play with scared money, right? Like even with changing early DCEU, they're like, people like this in Marvel, so I guess we should inject that kind of stuff into our set. Like they want that instant turnaround, be instantly the best. Nothing should grow. And it's more business minded, which feels like it's a failure more than creative minded and letting things grow naturally and take its course.
Yeah, my take is that there's two factors. Some of what you guys have mentioned, a little bit of them already. One is Disney's properties have legacy that WB's properties do not have. So you're dealing with Kathleen Kennedy, who was the heir apparent to George Lucas. That legacy on its own requires a little bit more white gloved. You don't just blow up Kathleen Kennedy the next day because she's a staple of Hollywood. Pete Docter has done some of the best Pixar films that we've actually seen, and he was the heir apparent to John Lasseter. And so there's legacy there that's holding that together. That's part of it. So there's this known legacy for those folks in Hollywood, in the system itself. The other thing he has to contend with is that they all had to report to him, then Bob Chapek, then him, and there's a streaming service change of priority twice in that course of time. And so you had these really strange things. So imagine you're reporting to Bob Iger, and Bob Iger comes to you, and you're Pete Docter, and he goes, well, Pete, some of these movies you've been putting out lately, like Soul, we didn't really get to do much with that. What does Pete say? Well, you cut it off at the knees because you put it on streaming. It didn't even go into theaters. There are good arguments to be had back. Kathleen Kennedy. Kathleen Kennedy, we don't have a film on the slate. Well, we don't have a film on the slate because I'm not trying to be Kevin Feige with too many projects, and I just made the slate all TV shows because that's what I was told to do. So you'd have something on streaming. Oh, well, okay, that's a pretty good excuse. So imagine if you combine legacy with changing leadership priorities that are basically Iger and Chapek's fault. Well, now you have a much harder case to be made that they should be let go. On the WB side, it wasn't good leadership to begin with, and two, it wasn't good leadership at the top. The studio wanted to mess with the projects way too much. If you go back to the Story Geeks channel instead of the Orange Grove channel, you will hear us lambasting WB for all of the things that they did to interfere with movies. But they also hired a guy who had a very specific type of comic book movie vision that he wanted to put out there, and it wasn't really for kids. It was really more for like teens and young adults and adults in Zack Snyder, and they did not like what Zack Snyder was doing in terms of the box office. It was easy to replace those things. There was no legacy there that was problematic for a different reason. So I think that Disney is going to have to make some moves like everybody else. Yeah, that's Bob Iger coming through on the train.
That's it, right?
He's just laying people off as he goes by. But I do think that Iger is going to have to make some changes. But I don't think he has been under the same amount of pressure.
It's a volatile time right now in Hollywood, right? So do you want to make too many moves right now, especially with this writer strike going on, and not a lot of talent in which to pull? I mean, so if you replace a Pete Docter, who are you going to replace him with?
Yeah.
If you replace the Kathleen Kennedy, who are you going to replace them with? I mean, that's kind of the other thing I think that's going on right here. I think he understands that there needs to be a change. Yeah. The question is what shape that will take ultimately, because it doesn't necessarily have to result in somebody being removed. Maybe a refocus for that studio.
Exactly. That's a really good point. Cool. We will close it out there. We would like to know what you think of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. If there's anything we missed, put it in the comments down below. Let us hear your thoughts. All right. We'll start out with Mike on this one. He's the guest. He gets to go first. Mike, tell the folks where they can find you and tell them a little bit more about your podcast.
You can find everything over at popfilter.co or at YourPopFilter on Instagram. On Twitter for now. Who knows how long we'll stay on Twitter. Currently, we have the Superhero Show where we watch and review every single live-action TV show based on comics. There are so many, and we are watching all of them. And then we have Movie of the Year. We build a bracket, make it fight for the best movie that year. We're going through 2002 right now. So coming up this season, we still have like Catch Me If You Can, Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, 25th Hour. So we really run the gamut. Everything a movie can be. And yeah, that's if you like it and you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/YourPopFilter. All those things plus more.
Yes, please go check it out. Great sense of humor on those shows, so go check it out for sure. Dr. Dre, where can the people find you, host of Freshly Squeezed?
Well, that's exactly where you can find me on Orange Grove 55, where we have some amazing shows, including my own Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice and news and info, squeezed fresh right from the grow. But we also have some other ones, amazing ones. Citrus Corner, hosted by my dear brother and friend, Citrus George up there, with his show that focuses all on Walt Disney World. I also have Orange Nerd and Orange Grove 55, where we talk about not only the Walt Disney Company, but also C-Suite, the entertainment industry, all of those things. That is for sure. And obviously the one you're watching right now, Story Geeks with Jay, talking about the stories that impact our lives. I love it. I absolutely dig it for sure. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter, you can go do so right there. At VashSky, just go ahead and type it in, and it should pop up for, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy would say, for all the
robust
discussions. That is for sure. Let's see which one. This one.
You know, I really liked it when you couldn't get that drop to work and you just had to go for it. That was excellent. There's some excellent work there, Mr. Dr. Dre. By the way, I think we can just call George Citrus George at this point, because you almost called him Citrus George, and I went, that's kind of awesome.
I almost
Citrus
did.
George.
And you know what? You're right about that, Citrus George. I like it.
I actually like it. I like it. I do. I like it.
Yeah,
that might have to stick.
And that's a good pun too. So where can people find you, George?
Absolutely. And I just have to say, it's definitely very refreshing to know that even without the sound effects to the my background noise of the train, Marty and Alia knew right off with track switch there. I think that was very impressive, and it just goes to show of how committed everyone is to our shows, and we greatly appreciate it. So thank you. But anyway, if you want to find me, you could check my YouTube channel at Disney Family Man 23. You can interact with me on Twitter at Disney George. You could check out the podcast I am part of, I Walk with Walt. And of course, you can find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
I don't have any hand motions for my show yet, so I don't know what I'm doing, but these guys all have hand motions. You just want to make a special shout out to OG55 for being the producer of today's show and getting completely spoiled because he still hasn't seen it and wants to eventually, but he's like, no, it's cool. I'll be spoiled. So OG, you have a good film to look forward to. I also want to give out a very special shout out to Marty Snyder because he says, looking forward to No Vacancy. No Vacancy is the short film that we have written. It is in the top 10% of projects on Coverfly, which is a writing platform for mostly screenplays and short films. And we are filming No Vacancy this year. In fact, if you want to support No Vacancy, you can do two different things. You can head over to How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. That is my channel where I'm usually talking to screenwriters or other writers of some sort. But we are going through a whole video series over there where I'm going to film table reads. I'll film some behind the scenes stuff. I'll talk to you about how this film is being made, how we've made films in the past. This is a proof of concept film for a feature film that we hope to produce in a couple of years. So we are very, very excited about that. And Marty as one of our first supporters. So huge shout out to Marty for supporting us over there. We'll give you special perks. I owe Marty a perk. We're doing like signed screenplays and stuff like that you can get your hands on. But it's gonna be a really fun journey. And later this year, we will have a film in hand. It is a superhero thriller. If you take Unbreakable and you sort of mix in a little bit of Knives Out, you get No Vacancy. So that's what we're working on right now. So you can check that out. And I appreciate you, Marty. And also Captain John D, he's not watching right now, but if he's in later, he's one of our first supporters as well. So thank you, Captain John D, for that. Really, really appreciate it. And in the meantime, we appreciate all of you watching. We appreciate our guest, Mr. Mike, coming over from the Superhero Show. Go check that out. And we will catch you all next time. Let us know what you want us to talk about, by the way. If there's a movie or a show we want to talk about, let us know in the comments, and we will be back later.